messed up situation. But what does this mean? Why does it matter? Not like individuals, like zoom out. Zoom out and be like, what is like, if this is the existence for an indentured servant, right? What does that mean for the labor system? In a sense, right? Like, think through it that way. Good job. So I'm just saying, yes. Freedom dues. There we go. I see you, Destiny. We love Destiny. Where's she coming
Yeah.
Almost like African plays According to the class, you hated me. I know. And then what happened? Now we're best friends. All right, let me stop your conversation there. Nice job. I heard some really good things back here. I heard some really good things over here. I heard some good things over here. Stansbury's in here as well. I always hear good things out of Stansbury. So let's talk about like the system of indentured servitude, because I think like getting our heads around this system of labor helps us kind of understand what happens next. So tell me, why? Why indentured servitude in the first place? Talk to me, please. What do we call it? Why? Why do we have a system of indentured servitude in the first place?
So that the rich people get the land that they were being promised to like go over there.
Good.
And it was a way for them to finally get a fresh start and also get land.
Good.
They competed in their sense.
Good job. Right? So like it's designed to solve two problems that I talked about last week. All right, we need laborers to pick all these cash crops, and people need to have land to make a bunch of money on cash crops. So our head-right system creates a situation in which indentured servitude is a short-term solution to this problem. So far, so good. Now, what struggles are we facing as the indentured servant class? This guy, Richard Frethorn, how's his life? Good, bad, ugly? Oh my God, right? But at least he didn't eat anybody. So I mean, he's got that. Things got a little better in Virginia. That he's, things are stuck. His friend steals his coat and then dies, but he does not eat his friend. So that's good. He should have. I agree. You want the beef? Have a human. That's karma. You're right. Damn right. Talk to me.
It wasn't all what it said. Obviously, like the way he made it seem in text, it seemed that they lived a better life in England.
Interesting. That's what I highlighted when I read this text again this morning. Is the expectations do not match reality. In that, I'll come to you right now. In that, like, at that last piece, I was talking to Brian about it as well. That last piece is important. He's like, I would have been better off staying in England. I want you to keep that line front and center in your head as you think about like what this means for indentured servitude as a whole. Daniel.
Something that my friend had noted was that they were given a range of tasks that were so different from each other that they were just so overworked. So
Oh yeah.
she had pointed out that they were given like the crop jobs, but then they were also put into war
Yeah.
to fight with chiefs that were needed.
Yeah, it's like, hey, grow our crops. Defend us from natives. Have a mouthful of bread. Right? It's not a good situation. It's not what it was promised to be. I want to point out one other line in here too, because I think it's important and it might help you guys understand a little more what I'm talking about. End of paragraph. I guess that would be paragraph like 4. And the nighest help that we have is 10 miles of us. And when the rogues overcame this place last, they slew 80 persons. So the nearest group that can help them is how far away? Yeah, 10 miles away. Why? Why are people so spread out? Because of the head-right system that creates massive plantations in which every single person has all this land and everybody else is really far spread out. Good job. I love how your hand shut up when you realize what I was trying to get at. Nicely done. Am I making a little bit of sense?
Yeah.
So would we have this problem in New England? No, because they're built around towns. They're built around community. They're built around little cities and families. However, because of like this system that they set up, now they're having these problems. Your hand was up?
Oh, I was going to say that there was like a line that I found.
There's a couple lines in there that are crazy. Talk to me.
The last one where the very last paragraph where it says, "For I am not half a quarter as strong as I was in England. And all is for want of victuals. For I do protest unto you have that whole line."
I've eaten more today at home than I've had here in a week. So what's he saying, Dan?
That the life here is so horrible, he just wants to go back home.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Why did he leave England? Yeah, to get a better life. All right, he tells his parents, "You've given more than my day's allowance to a beggar at the door." So I think it's important that we understand, like, which is why I focused on like indentured servitude as a system first, and then now we're into that kind of the reality of it. What are the ramifications? What are the consequences of this for labor in the southern colonies? Michael, talk to me. What do you think? Like, if this is the reality, what are the consequences or the ramifications of this for labor in the southern colonies?
I guess like servitude media anymore?
Yeah, yeah. Are these people forced to come? No. Talk to me.
It makes slavery sound more appealing on both ends because for
Except for the slave.
yeah, for
Okay.
laborers because that means they get free labor and there's like you said there's easy to replace. So here we can see that they're dying because of diseases, but
Yep.
with slaves they could just keep replacing.
Definitely part of it, right? That this system of indentured servitude is a good short-term solution, but once, do you think he's the only person writing a letter like this home? No. Maybe there's 2 or 3 more. Maybe 5. Maybe dozens. Maybe hundreds. So eventually people are going to be like, why would I go sign up for that life, which is in a brand new place by myself, miserable, risk death, fight some Indians, have some disease, and have a mouthful of bread and have somebody steal my coat? Jerk. Part of sad. Man, how do you have to do something like that? I think I was dying, you wouldn't tell them where the coat went. Say, where'd you take it? My last secret. Yeah. So eventually, like the supply of labor is going to dry up because people are going to no longer want to sign up for this kind of life. Good. So today we're going to talk about dissent and development. What does it mean to dissent? To dissent. It's a good word. It's a good APUSH word. It's a good gov word too. It's a good politics word. To dissent. Anybody?
Give in.
No, not quite. Y'all have some high-ass Lexiles and you don't know what dissent means? Talk to me.
To give, to come from?
It's kind of to push back on, to forcefully disagree. So in the Supreme Court, for example, which we'll talk about once we get to period 3 and 4, the side that disagrees with the ruling says we dissent, these are the reasons. So dissent means to disagree or to push back on. So I'm going to start a theme. I started a lot of themes in period 2 on purpose because they kind of carry us through the whole year of American identity, in that it questions established authority. And this is really going to start kind of from the get-go. Right? You're going to argue that Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson, they questioned established authority. They questioned the church's authority. The Puritans, by simply coming here, questioned authority. We'll talk today about Bacon's Rebellion, how that's an example of questioning authority. So we're going to talk about this a lot this year, about in my opinion, one of the hallmarks about what makes America good is the ability to question authority. Not that we always get the results we want, we don't, but the freedom to question it is a healthy part of a functioning political society. Your prompt is here. Evaluate the extent to which transatlantic exchanges. I apologize. No, I changed that up last minute, just last night, but I didn't change the slide. It's under here. It's on the end of this though. How much do colonies develop an identity separate from that of Great Britain by 1725? So by the end of today's lecture, how much are these colonies different from Britain? How much are they not different from Britain? I think it'll make it pretty clear that economically, very similar. Politically, socially, maybe not so similar. Cool? I didn't put the outline on your notes today because I didn't want to use a whole other piece of paper and then we're like right to the end. Look how short your notes are today. This is the shortest one you'll get all year probably. 4 pages? Wow. We'll talk Bacon's Rebellion. and colonial slavery first. We'll talk about the halfway covenant and the Salem witch trials. Look at some southern identity, some northern identity. We'll talk about the Atlantic system, the exchanges between us and across the Atlantic, and mercantilism. And then we'll talk about colonial politics and diversity. So by the end of today, we're basically at 1725. We're basically done-ish with period 2, with the exception of the Enlightenment and Great Awakening for Monday. So at this point, like by the time today is over, you should have a pretty firm understanding about who the colonies are, who the colonists are, why they're there, what they're doing, and what kind of identities and societal foundations they've built. So if you're not there, that's okay. Also, what happens today after school? Tutoring. If you're planning on coming, awesome. We'll give you a spiral notebook to keep as your Thursday notebook all year. It becomes quite helpful. We will be in Miss Stobart's room because it's bigger, it's a little more space, and we can be a little more spread out since eventually there'll be a lot of us, I promise. So please, if you're concerned about your test next week, come. If you're not concerned, don't come. If you just want to come get a free spiral notebook and hang out for a little bit, come. If you can only come for 20 minutes, what should you do? Come for 20 minutes. What if you can only come for 12 minutes? Come. But what should you come with? Questions. Thursdays, you'll see today. But you'll come in and you'll just write, and everybody come in, there's markers out, you'll write on the board things that you're confused about. And then I'll walk us through all the things that people are confused about, and maybe I'll add in some more fun stuff. Cool. So if you're confused, come. If you're not confused, don't come. If you fail your test next Thursday, maybe come the Thursday after. Cool. So let's talk first Bacon's Rebellion. I know you guys read about it, but it's a really important turning point event in American history. We're talking about the year, it's another forever year, 1676. 100 years before we're going to declare independence. 100 years. 1676. Now, let's talk about what's happening in the colonies that makes this happen. At the beginning of Virginia, what was life like? Healthy, unhealthy, happy, unhappy? Virginia, beginning. What are we talking about? What's up? Unhealthy. Are people living long? No. No. How many indentured servants are surviving the end of their term? 1 in 10. Not good. However, we've been here now for, who's good at math? 69, 70 years. And in this 70 years, life expectancy, how long people are living, has gone up. Health has gone up. Profits for the rich have gone up. And when life expectancy is longer, people are living longer, guess who else is living longer? The indentured servants are living longer. The indentured servants are actually surviving their terms. Now let me ask you, Montan, what are indentured servants promised after they've worked their 5 or 7 years? Daughter? Land. Now, if they die first, what do you have to give them? A hole in the ground. Reasonable? But if they start surviving, we have to give them their land. So far, so good? You guys are with me? Now, where is this land going to be? Yeah, right? This land is going to be on the frontier. Out on the outskirts of society. Because all the interior land, the good land, the developed land is all taken already. Why? Federal system. So their land is going to be out on the frontier. Out kind of in the middle of nowhere. Out on their own. And this wasn't a problem the first 40 years because nobody was surviving, so it didn't really matter. But now that people are actually surviving their indentured servitude terms, there's a lot of former indentured servants who are out on the frontier kind of living on their own. You guys still with me? Good. So in the late 1660s, so leading up to this, these poor indentured servants who've been freed, who've lived past their term and now have their own little farms, are really miserable for two reasons. Reason one, poor tobacco prices. Poor tobacco prices, meaning they're still growing tobacco like they were when they were indentured servants, but the prices have gone down. So then what else goes down? Profits. Feel free to chime up. You guys got these answers. I know you guys did your homework. So the prices go down, so their profits go down, and now they're broke. They're like, well, I worked all these 5 to 7 years to get rich on tobacco, and now I'm free, and I can't make any money because this. Yes?
I don't know if I use the correct term, but I described it kind of as like an inflation thing.
In a sense. So what happens is when prices go down, and we'll talk about this way more later. I'm just going to introduce it real quick right now. This is more of a period 6 Gilded Age thing. But when prices go down, should people produce more or less of something? Less. Because you guys are smart. What they do instead is they produce more because they want to make more money. But all that does is cause what happens with the prices? Continue to go down. So these indentured servants are struggling because now there's more people growing tobacco. Why? Because they got freed off of their plantation, and now they're growing tobacco, and their former plantations are growing tobacco, and everybody's growing tobacco, and he's growing tobacco, and he's growing tobacco. She's smoking tobacco. I don't know what he's smoking. Some of that weird shit. Look at this guy. And now everybody's growing tobacco, so of course prices go down. And indentured servants like, we finally made it to our freedom, and now we're still broke. Second reason is they're out on the frontier, and they're subject to a ton of Indian attacks. Right? The Indians are attacking them as they're trying to spread out and clear land and build farms, and the Indians are attacking, the Indians are attacking, the Indians are attacking. Now, these farmers, all of them are going to blame one person, and that person's name is Governor Berkeley. You read a little chunk of his in the back of your homework, Governor William Berkeley, because he's the governor. He's in charge of Virginia, and their argument is, hey, we're members of Virginia society, and you're not protecting us. You should be sending our little militia to protect us from the Native Americans. You should be helping us economically, and yet here you are, all rich, sitting in the big city of Jamestown, living it up, and we're out here on the frontier miserable. Do they have a reasonable complaint? Yeah, right? If you believe that the government exists to support people that need support, like, sure. And Nathaniel Bacon, in my opinion, this is the most American thing ever, a rebellion named for bacon. Americans love bacon. In 2 rebellions, we're going to have a whiskey rebellion. So I'll have a bacon rebellion and a whiskey rebellion. But this one's not about bacon. That one's actually about whiskey. Give it up to America. Now, there'd be a huge rebellion against Berkeley. Now, the scary part for colonial society is the people that are involved in this rebellion are these white people who are former indentured servitude, free blacks, women, and all sorts of other lower class individuals. Landless farmers, former indentured servants, free black people, black indentured servants, women. So take a minute, what does that say about colonial society that this chunk of people can rebel together? 1 minute, dive in and talk to your partner. What does that say about colonial society? Go for it. Go for it. What does that say?
It's like a common
What does that say? 30 seconds. All right, we'll stop you guys there. So I want to hear it. What does it say about colonial society if this is the group that is rebelling? Let me hear from Leslie. What do you think? You guys had that deep of a conversation that you just don't have anything to say? That's okay. Talk to me then. Nieto. What does it say about colonial society? Oh. Sure, they don't care about the small people. Guys, your hand was up.
There was the overwhelming population of underclassmen, but the fact that they could rebel means that they dominated the
Potentially. You're on the right track. Talk to me and then talk to me. Go.
Because there's a very big gap between like the rich and poor.
Now we're on the right track. The biggest divide in colonial society is not what? What isn't the big divide that you would think would be the big divide? Is it race? Not a boy. It's not race, it's social class. So this is important, because this is going to give us our little spark to get to slavery. Hear me out. That this tells upper class white society we have a problem. And our problem is that our lower classes, yes, to Yasmin's point, are numerous, but are biracial, are diverse. So what we're, and it's crazy how this is going to have ramifications for literally the rest of American history. So upper class white society is going to have to find a way to convince the lower class white people, the Nathaniel Bacons of the world, that their problem isn't with rich white people, their problem is with race. Think on that for a second.
I already started going out before you.
It's kind of deep, isn't it? Think on that again just for a second. Let that ponder in your head. Let that marinate, if you will. That here in Virginia, the divide that leads to this rebellion is rich and poor. Are there more rich people or more poor people? More poor people. Who's that bad for? Rich people. However, if we can instead make our divide then we're in a different conversation. So the rebellion itself fails miserably. Like most attempts by the poor to uproot the upper classes, with the exception of the French Revolution, because they had some badass guillotines. With the exception of that, the rebellion itself fails. However, this does a couple things. Thing one it does is it makes plantation owners realize we should not be using indentured servants for labor. Because if we do, eventually they're going to be free, and they're going to be poor, and they're going to be pissed. Who we should use for labor instead are African slaves, because they're never free, and then we can also own their children as property as well. White indentured servants, this class that up to this point has provided much of the labor for Virginia, are seen as too much trouble, because they got freed and they were pissed off and they rebelled. But what this also reveals is there's a lot of tension, which you'll see for the rest of American history, between the rural frontier areas and the more developed areas. So another conflict this reveals, which is the first of many, is rural versus urban. And I'll put urban in quotation marks here because we're not really talking about like what we envision as urban, but the more developed societal institutional places. So what we're going to see instead is the planter class. Those that own the plantations are going to use race instead to manipulate these poor white people to get on this side of the divide instead of this side of the divide. Thank you for dealing with my crazy diagrams that I'm drawing. I think it's quite helpful. Interesting. I have two short video clips that I'm going to save for right now, though. Then I'll try to circle back and show you maybe on either the end of class or this time, or we might Monday, about how slavery develops because of this. Now, I have a beautiful visual for you. A beautiful visual. It's very nice. I like this a lot. So we see from 1607 to about 1650, our labor system in Virginia is white indentured servitude. But that works. Why does it work? Because they're dying. Sadly. It doesn't work for them because they're dead. But it works as a system because it's like, I'm going to bring over the 10 of you guys. You're going to work for me. I'm going to get my 500 acres of land. And at the end of the 7 years, only he survived. That's unrealistic, actually. I apologize. Only he's... That's still unrealistic. I don't know if any of y'all survived. At the end... yeah, maybe. Yeah, he's pretty strong for that guy. At the end of the 7 years, only one person survived. You with me? So it works for me because now I got to give land to one person. And there's only one of them. I'm not outnumbered by the lower classes. But what happens by 1660 when all freaking 10 of these idiots survive? Now I got 10 poor idiots running around that are ready to cause trouble and cause rebellions and cause chaos. So the problem becomes this, it's a good problem to have in society. People are dying less. There's a decline in mortality rates. So because these idiots are surviving, and I say that with all due love and respect, it's a good term. Because these idiots are surviving, now they're going to have land, there's going to be a lot of them, they're going to have more voluminous presence in society, and it's these servants that are surviving their terms which is going to cause a labor system shift, a shift in the labor system. As white indentured servitude declines, and then what replaces it? Race-based slavery. Now the problem becomes, why did the people go to Virginia in the first place? To get rich. So rather than simply work out a system in which you pay your labor, they're so used to this first 50 years of having free labor that they just go find free labor somewhere else. Wow. Interesting. Turn your page. This is an example of what you'll see for one of your SAQs, one of your short answer questions on the actual AP test. You'll have two historians side by side talking about the same event and giving their view on what actually happened and why it happened. And your job, for now only, is to just tell me how do they differ in their perspectives. Kind of like what you guys did for your homework yesterday. Those are primary sources, not secondary sources. So we have two pieces, Edmund Morgan from a really good book, called American Slavery, American Freedom. And then we have Ira Berlin, another fantastic book he wrote recently, titled Many Thousands Gone, The First 2 Centuries of Slavery in North America. So they're both going to give you their views on what causes this increase in slavery. I think both of them are right. Your job is not to figure out who's right. Your job is to look at these two historical perspectives and try to look at what their different views are. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'll give you 6. I'm feeling generous today. 6 minutes. Just dive into both perspectives and just tell me real quickly. I don't need like crazy long analysis, but how do they differ in their view of this new increase in slavery and why it happened and what it means? Cool. 6 minutes to read and get after it, and I'll just talk about which part. 6. Dive in. Go. Two very good perspectives to help you get your mind around Bacon's Rebellion a little better anyway. Crazy explanation. A diagram. And that's for the rest of the history. And the LBJ theory. You recommend the lowest white man is better than the best black man. The races of the nation forever. What? Seriously? How do they differ in their opinions of what really causes this increase in race-based slavery? you say that. You're reading? You're reading? So focus for the 5 minutes at a time. Come on. How do they differ? This is important. You're going to see a lot of these this year, so jump into it. How do they differ in their views of the increase in slavery? I think it's going to be dropped out of class. Different bell schedule for today?
Indentured.
Okay. Instead of 43, you're going to
Yeah. Should been or some. Let me just double check.
Whenever. We got an hour. Oh, short. Nice. Appreciate it. Words on page. Tell me how they differ. Even if it's just bullet pointed, I need you to tell me how they're different in their views on what causes this increase in slavery. Seconds. So what I want you to be able to dive in on here, I know it's early in the year, but I need you to be able to read these little chunks and tell me, what is this author's thesis? What is their argument? What are they trying to prove in this short piece? Okay. So take the next two with the people next to you and dive in, right? What is Morgan's argument about the causes of growth of American slavery, the impact of Bacon's Rebellion? All right, and then vice versa, what is Berlin's thesis? What is his argument? What is he arguing? What is his perspective on this growth of slavery? Reasonable? So take two, talk about it. We'll kind of break it all down, both perspectives of the class. 2 minutes. Go for it. Go for it. What's up? How was it? you're right. Life expectancy plays a role. Good. Yeah, Morgan, you're right. They're not. So white people stop coming. That's one of the reasons why. And what do you say is the big reason why slavery is? Greater consequence of decline and people are dying. People are living longer, the slave becomes a better buy. Because slaves are going to live a long time and it makes it a better investment. That's all everybody, you got this, guys. Stay with me. First time we're doing this. Cool. So I'm seeing a mixed bag of responses, which is okay. This is the first time I'm putting this in front of you. I'm just promising you right now that you'll see this literally all the time, at least once a week. You'll have a side-by-side historian perspectives. You have to tell me how they differ on this view. But in doing so, you're actually reading some like expert historians and their perspectives on things. So it actually kills a lot of birds with one stone. It's a win. And in general, these things usually come out of books that I've read, right? And then the College Board has these kinds of questions on the test as well, which is kind of weird. What was your text comparison question on last year? Women in the Revolution. Yeah. One historian argued that the Revolutionary War was good for women, and one argued that it wasn't far best for women. So they have to like dive into like, what backs up this, what backs up that. So, did you feel prepared for that question?
Yes.
Because you've read these damn historian perspectives all year? Good. So, but this is a new one that I pulled this year because I read the book on the left, Edmund Morgan's book, I read at the summer. I was like, I want to include that in class, so I did. You'll learn this year that I read way too much. It's kind of a problem. My wife complains that I buy too many books. I complain that she buys too many shoes, so you know, we're all even. These books are useful. Now, what is Morgan's arguments regarding Bacon's rebellion? This is a hard question, so I want to hear from you guys. Freddie, what do you think? What is Morgan's argument? What is he trying to get at?
That there was like a higher life expectancy, so it made them like
Who's that?
slaves
Mhm.
that had higher life expectancy. So they're like buyers are more encouraged to buy them.
Why?
Because
You're
they
right.
last longer.
Because they're going to last longer. Perfect. He's like, yeah, Bacon's rebellion is important because it helped make white people not want to come to the colonies. So he's not saying that Bacon's rebellion is not important to get us to slavery, but he's saying the real reason why slavery becomes so prevalent is that slaves are living longer and therefore they're a better investment. You don't want to spend all this money on anything and have it not last a long time. If I buy a new car and it lasts me a year, that was a bad purchase. Reasonable? If I buy a new pair of shoes and I wear them out and blow out the front of them in like 6 months, that was a bad purchase. So I don't want to compare humans to shoes, but if you think about it from an economic standpoint, a purchasing standpoint, that Morgan's argument is that yes, Bacon's rebellion is important because it caused fewer white people to come to the colonies. But the more important development that increased slavery was that slaves were living longer and therefore they were a wiser investment of money. Good job. Proud of you, kid. So who can I pick on for a hard question? And I just looked at your face. And I was like, she's got this. And then she did got this. Lovely. However, Stanford, I'm going to pick on you for this one. What is Berlin's argument?
That Bacon's rebellion was the real reason why slavery was increased.
Why? How? What does Bacon's rebellion do? Because you're right. That is his argument.
It reveals the gap between social classes.
Good. It reveals. Good. That Bacon's rebellion reveals this gap I just told you about. And what do the rich do as a result?
They
So the rich see Bacon's Rebellion as a problem, and they use it as an excuse to enact very strict slave codes, and then use them as labor, and then convince white people that they're also their enemy. Which one's right? They're both right. They're both right. It's also important that we look at some of the societal factors in England that play a role. That European servants are declining because the living conditions in England have improved. So there's less people trying to get out of England. There's less discrimination for poor people in England, so there's less people leaving. So it's all of these societal factors. And when you read these, your job isn't to summarize both perspectives. Your job is to dive right in and tell me, like, what are these people arguing? What is their perspective? What is their historical argument? So big snaps to you and you for figuring out, like, how to do that really, really well. Nicely done. Nicely done. You guys feel a little better about that now? Good. So let's then talk about slavery. It's not just caused by Bacon's Rebellion. It's caused by a variety of things. The first is a decrease in indentured servants. There's fewer of them that are coming, and yet these people still need labor. Decrease in indentured servants because England is doing better economically. People in England are making more money. Wages are up. So it's harder to get indentured servants to come. Also, as you read in your do not letter, like, life sucks as an indentured servant, so fewer people want to come. There's a huge increase in the availability of slaves. Slaves are way easier to come by. It's easier to buy slaves. The Royal African Company, they lose their monopoly, so there's more competition for slave traders, which means that prices are going to come down when there's competition. So there's a decrease in price for slaves. There's more slaves that are available. It becomes easier to get them because it's not just one company that's selling slaves, but a variety of companies are selling slaves. It's pretty terrible. This third big bullet point comes off of Bacon's Rebellion. This worry, this fear, that if we have a bunch of free men that are landless, this problem right here, this rich versus poor, how can we solve that? By not having a bunch of poor men that have no land. And like I talked about last week with the Carolinas, that slave code, slave culture from Barbados that first comes to, like, South Carolina is going to gradually make its way north. So there's an abundance of supply of slaves that are in the Carolinas that people are willing to purchase or sell into the American colony. And this is when I start to argue that, like, the Deep South and the Chesapeake kind of merge into one region. That they're just all based on slavery. So, slaves, however, don't necessarily appreciate this new tightened restrictions on their existence. So it's important that we understand that slaves don't just accept this system, that this is a two-way street. You can't just make somebody a slave, like there's going to be resistance and the like to that, and there's widespread resistance in the 18th century. Those of you who were in African studies last year, so you, we talked about this a lot. About every time slaves resist, though, what happens as a result? Yeah, stricter restrictions. Stricter restrictions. So as slaves push back on this new system of slavery in America, restrictions just get tighter and tighter and tighter. It's important you guys remember a couple of these rebellions. The first is the Stono Rebellion. Of all the places where it took place, of course, it happened in South Carolina, because South Carolina causes every problem in American history. South Carolina in 1739, so about 60 years after we started seeing an increase in slavery in South Carolina. And it's an example of slaves organizing, coming together, and rebelling, and ultimately being unsuccessful. And as a result, they are made examples of, they are hung, they are put to death. But it's this right here that scares white people elsewhere. There's this huge fear in white Southern society of slave rebellions. Why? Why is there a huge fear of slave rebellions? There's lots of slaves, and they're pissed. Yeah. So it's this in South Carolina. 2 years later, there's a rumor of slaves that are going to burn down New York City. So what New York City does, as a result, is just rounds up slaves that are rumored to be part of this group and hangs them to make an example of them, to intimidate other slaves from doing the same thing. And that's considered the New York City slave rebellion. And also runaway slaves are very common as well, especially early in society when people are way more spread out. So I would be doing a disservice to you to talk about just the institution of slavery without the slaves themselves and the way in which they try to push back on this, but then ultimately why they'd be unsuccessful. I heard so many people who were like, oh yeah, if I was a slave, I'd never do that. But you understand, like, the way that society creates these expectations and the way that society intimidates you into submission by, oh yeah, there was a rebellion and then everybody got hung and left on posts that everyone can see. You want to rebel, this is what happens. So people have to make a choice, right? Like try to push back on the system and potentially die, or live and exist in the system. Now, it's important that we also point out that in the Chesapeake and the southern colonies, there's a lot of black people. There's a lot of slaves. And because there are so many of them, they're going to have a pretty easy time maintaining their identity and culture. Does that make kind of sense? Right, like how come, for example, this is a good question for you guys. How come, for example, in this area of Los Angeles, you see a ton of signs in Spanish, you see a ton of places you can get good Mexican food, and you ride on the street and you hear all kinds of Latinx music, and it's a very Latinx-dominated community. Why? Why? Come on, do you guys live here? Why? What? Because there's lots of them. So it's easier for that community to maintain their identity and culture because they're not assimilating into a heavily white area. Whereas, question for you. Now, I went to a high school that had like 8 white people. What if you guys went to a high school where you were one of like 5 or 6 people that looked like you? Would you still like aggressively display your culture proudly? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. You don't know. Because you don't go to that high school. My point is, though, that for the southern communities, because there is so many African Americans, they're able to still embrace their identity, embrace their culture, and embrace their roots, which ends up giving us African American culture today. Because there's so many of them. Slaves find it easier to maintain their African culture. Whereas in the north, where there's far fewer slaves, you don't see African Americans maintaining their culture because there's so few of them. Now, what makes American slavery unique, though, this is crazy to me. This never happens in the Caribbean. This never happens elsewhere. By 1720, the slave population is self-sustaining. The slave population is self-sustaining. Now, that fact, whose argument does that back up? Morgan's or Berlin's? Take a minute, talk about it. If I tell you that by 1720, slaves are being born faster than they're dying, so we don't need to import any more slaves because their population is going to self-sustain, does that back up Morgan's perspective or Berlin's perspective? 1 minute. Go for it. Go. Tell me why. Why? Who's? No, you're not. All right. Let me hear from Justin. What do you think?
Morgan?
Why? I agree with you.
Because right here in the last line it says the slaves became a better body and the servant.
Yeah. So if I asked you, like, what's evidence that backs up Morgan's perspective, you could use this as SFI. That because the African American population in America becomes self-sustaining, that demonstrates it is a better investment, and therefore it's wiser to invest in that than in white indentured servants. Good. Nicely done. We don't see that in the Caribbean, we don't see that in South America, but in America, in the British 13 colonies, the slave population is self-sustaining. It's crazy. In Virginia, by 1720, 40% of the people in that colony are slaves. 40%! In South Carolina, it is 60%. White people are outnumbered by slaves, which is why this is so important. When you're already outnumbered, you can't have poor white people realizing that you and the slave have the same enemy, and it's the rich white plantation owner. But if you make it a race divide, you can keep the entire race subjugated. Kind of wild. We see far fewer free and enslaved black people in the New England and Middle colonies, but they are still there. Right? It's not that there's no slaves in the North or no slaves in the Middle colonies. There's just fewer of them. Because those are places where we also don't see a lot of indentured servitude, etc. Daniel, your question.
Are there any like modern states today that are dominated by African Americans?
Modern states today? Kind of. We'll get there, though. That'll play a nice role when we get to Reconstruction. And once we all of a sudden give black people the right to vote, they're outvoting white people who will freak out. But that's not. So take a look. Here's a map. I'll give you 1 minute on this map with your partner. Answer the question for me, what does this slave demographic map demonstrate about colonial society? Go for it. Dive in with your partner. Be the man. I think we go.
Oh, wait, no.
What is this?
Yeah.
Demographic map reveal. Darker the color, the more dense it is. Not really. We might mention him closer to at 35. That's more of like a cool case study for like that kind of class. But, I mean, I'll use it. Might as well. Is there like slave resistance? Like what's we're an actual country? Yeah. So, what does this reveal? Yeah. There's more slaves in the South. Good. Right? Like this is our dividing line. That's Maryland. That's Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. What's crazy right now is you can see that Georgia only has 15,000 slaves, but that 15,000 slaves is still over 60% of the population. So Georgia is still very sparsely populated. They have a small number and still a high density. But look at Virginia, for example, 187,000 slaves, South Carolina, 75,000 slaves. A lot of slaves in the southern communities, in the southern colonies. And shockingly enough, that will be the line for the Civil War, which is fought 140 years later over the existence of slavery. Go figure. Roots are planted very early. So that's Southern society. I'm going to zoom our way up to New England. Go ahead and turn your page. So what's happening there, which demonstrates their kind of turning points and shifts as well. We dove quite well, I think, into like why slavery develops in the way that it does in the South. Nicely done. Now let's talk about New England. Now, question for you guys. Who could vote? Who could have power? Who had influence in New England society? We talked about it yesterday. Yeah, perfect puritanical church members. Now the halfway covenant is important because it basically demonstrates that you don't have to be a crazy perfect Christian in order to have influence in New England. What kind of Christian do you have to be? A halfway Christian. So what this is a liberalization and a relaxation of church requirements. Let's talk about why. Why, take a minute, talk to your person next to you, why might New England be loosening the restrictions on society by the 1660s? Question, when did they show up in New England? What year? Mayflower Compact. It's okay. It's okay. It's only day 8. We're in good shape. 1620. 40, and there we talked about city on a hill, perfection. We're all watching each other. Freaking watching you. Sick and tired of his nonsense. Watching you too. Don't smile. Don't smile in here. This is church. We don't smile in church. This is for Jesus. And 42 years later, they're going to loosen things up a little bit. Talk to your partner about maybe why. Dive in, 1 minute. Go for it. Why? Why are they loosening things up? Sorry. Think about it. Why? 10 more seconds. All right, stop you guys there. Gilberto, what do you think? Why? Why are they loosening things up? They want more people. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of it. Why else? What do you think, Emily?
They probably want more church.
Maybe they want more church members. Sure. Yeah, that's both of you are not incorrect. Kevin Scott, what do you think? They want more communists? You just pull up random words? I'm gonna go with communism. That's always the right answer. It's reasonable. That's what just happened. Felix, talk to me. What do you guys think? They took yours, right? Like white people in land, they just took it. Carry on.
I was going to say that.
Okay.
More people.
Okay.
Just to come in and.
Now, let me ask you guys something. Because you're gonna just repeat what they say. I don't need to hear that in my life. Let me ask you a quick question though. How many of you have a Spanish-speaking grandmother or grandfather? Yes. And how many of those grandmothers or grandfathers yell at you for not speaking Spanish? Yeah. See? What's my point? Over generations, things tend to loosen up a little bit. And by 1662, we're on like generation 3 of Puritans. And every generation's like, yeah, this is a little crazy. We should be a little bit less crazy. And the next generation's like, yeah, this is a little crazy. We should be a little less crazy. Yes, sir.
What could it also be motivated by colonial competition? Because they see that a lot of success is happening in Pennsylvania or Rhode Island, so they kind of see that, we kind of need more people to come into our churches.
Sure, that's part of it. Massachusetts still has a lot of people, but keep in mind that 70,000 people that rolled over in the Great Migration, like, population's not the primary focus. I think the primary focus is like, why are we doing this? Right, this is crazy. And but yeah, it's a phenomenal question, and kind of. So it's a clear compromise from the earlier strict regulations. And what it reveals is that, in a sense, like, their desire to come over here and be perfect is now being taken over by their desire to come over here and just be happy and content. And they're going to keep their emphasis on family, on community, on togetherness, on we, on us, on the common good, without the crazy component of, like, I'm watching you. If you sin, I'm going to tell anybody. Going to hell. See you guys there. Is Rhode Island still a sewer? Now I consider no. Now I consider the sewer in New Jersey. That sucks. Now, it's important that we understand these first generation Puritans that at first came over with this crazy understanding and their background of why they came over, they're dying off. And it's this second and third generation that are a little bit less radical, a little bit less extreme. So we're losing Puritan influence, but they're leaving behind these other important elements of their society, like the common good, like community, like family. So like some of you guys won't have your grandkids even know Spanish. Reasonable? Right? 4th, 5th, 6th generation, it's kind of the way it works. But they're going to lose the ability to then speak Spanish, maybe. What will they keep? Maybe the work ethic that brought your family here. right? Maybe the value of like family and togetherness and culture that brought you here. So my point is that the Puritans are losing like the crazy religious component, but they're keeping the other elements of their culture and society. Of we, common good, us, togetherness. So this is when we start to see the Puritans losing their influence. What actually kills their influence for the final time is the Salem witch trials. So you got these crazy young women that are acting all strange, freaking out. You guys ever read The Crucible? Some of you, yeah, it's a good book. Read it. And these young women are going to accuse this African slave woman and 2 local white women of witchcraft. Now, in a very Christian society, oh my God, absolutely not. The judges in the case are going to ignore. There's supposed to be a ban, according to New England society and the laws they put together, a ban on like circumstantial evidence. There's no hard evidence, no concrete evidence, just he said, she said. And they, the judges ignored this ban. 185 people ended up being accused, a bunch of women, some men, and 19 people are executed. 19 people are killed for participating in witchcraft in the Massachusetts colony. 14 of them are women, 5 are men. But this like crazy hysteria and this crazy controversy and this crazy society that's like freaking out about these things in a very extreme way is going to also then shed light on why we shouldn't follow the puritanical way of doing things with black and white, right and wrong. If you don't follow our exact rules, you're banished. So really it's the halfway covenant and the Salem witch trials together, which are by the end of the 1600s going to turn the New England area into less puritanical, less crazy religious focused, but instead more broadly understanding of the common good we in community. Cool? Agree? So I have 2 perspectives on the Puritans that I want you to read side by side. They're both very good. Our second one of these. 2 good historians. One writes a book in 1938 called The Puritans, and a more recent book by David Hall called Worlds of Wonder, Days of Judgment. So tell me, all you know is how are they different in the way in which trying to wave at somebody who's 4 feet away from you? How are they different in the ways in which they view the way the Puritans built society? I'm going to give you 4 minutes. I'll give you 5 minutes because they're a little shorter. Dive in, read it, and hopefully you can do a little better this time because you had practice the first time with what I'm looking for. Go for it. Dive in. They're both good text. Here you go. Because the Puritans were at that point 250 years old, so close parts they do the Puritans. Historians always write books. They don't know what's coming next. They know what came before. There's value in it. It's called historiography. Two different views on the Puritans. They're very opposite views. What's the difference? Got our lip gloss out. Man, I'm so sorry to get in the way of your day. Not bad. Over here moving in. How are they different in the way they view the period? There's a very easy, clear difference here. Last one was a little murkier. This is a clearer line. 3 minutes. And the rest of the guys get after it. What are they arguing? How are they different in their views of the Puritans? Yes, Daniel.
Yeah, it was too, they had too much in common. There was too much, not enough separation. That everybody everybody shared too much. There was too much we and us, not enough like we do this. Which I think is in many ways false. But in some ways correct. Economically and socially. Religiously and culturally. So in a sense they're kind of saying the same things. But
One minute. So, nicely done. Nicely done. In the interest of time, I picked up what I wanted to see from most of your responses. Miller and Johnson are basically arguing that the Puritans create a system that has too much social stratification. That the elites have everything, and that the everyday class people have nothing. Whereas Hall argues that the clergy, the people in charge of the church, don't have enough separation or difference between them in power and the everyday types of people. So please, as you get used to reading these side-by-sides, get used to being able to read high-level history and delineate what it is they're arguing. So I want to make sure that we finish on time for you guys to do those, so I'm going to make sure that we are speeding along in a reasonable fashion. England sees what's happening in New England, and the way New England's doing their own thing, running their own things, making their own decisions, having all their colonial assemblies. And England gets a little worried that the New England region, the Northeast, has too much self-rule, too much control for themselves. So King James II tries to put all of New England under the rule of one colony, one royal colony, and he calls it the Dominion of New England. Look how long it lasts. 3 years. So for 3 years, England's like, hey, you guys are getting a little bit too free, a little bit too open-minded. We're going to put you back under royal control as a royal colony, and it's not Massachusetts anymore, or Rhode Island anymore, or New Hampshire anymore. You're just going to be the Dominion of New England. It's an administrative union. I'm going to administer you guys, treat you guys the same way. Edmund Andros is appointed as the governor, the guy in charge, and 3 years later it's dissolved. Why? Because in most of these colonies there are revolts against political control. So even in 1689, we see people in the British colonies being like, we're cool being British, but don't come over here and try to tell us what to do. This is important. Early on, we're seeing this development of, hey, we have no problem being part of your empire, but don't come over here and tell us how to live our lives. And the fact that England gives up in 3 years, what does that say about England? What? What does that say about England? What do you guys think? The fact that England's like, yeah, we're going to control you. 3 years later, they're like, yeah, never mind. They don't want to waste the resources. They don't think it's worth the trouble. And they're going to let the colonies keep developing on their own. Go ahead. Kind of. At this point, it's so early that this is going to backfire on England later. Cool. So I have a diversity map up here for you. I like maps. The green, you guys can't see as well, the green is English. The yellow are areas heavily populated by African slaves. As you can see, the whole Charleston, South Carolina area, the whole Chesapeake. Orange is German. Purple is Scottish. This magenta color, if you will, is Scots-Irish. And the blue is Dutch. So take 1 minute with your partner. What does this population racial diversity map, what does that reveal about colonial society as well? There's a pretty clear, easy answer in this one. 1 minute. Dive in with the person next to you. What do you got? Yeah, but it's not true. That's like me saying like they're all Latinx. What's the difference? Don't go down that road. What? It's the 1700s as well. We're talking about a very different world. Up. Go. Get out. Get out. So do you? Spanish?
Oh, yeah.
That's European. All right. Talk to me, please. Talk to me, please. Talk to me, please. Right. What does this diversity map tell us about colonial society? I think you're on the right track. I can't quite hear you though. Talk to me. Fantastic. Then it's English white America that has much of the good eastern seaboard land, and the minorities, if you will, they're still like, this guy was like, well, they're all white. I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. However, you also look white. So, these minority type, the Germans, the Scots, Irish, they are living and existing on the frontier. Very good point. That's exactly what I was looking for. In that yes, America is a diverse place in terms of European backgrounds, because you're all very different cultures, I promise, at the time. Now, not so much. But at the time, you're all very different cultures, and it's these cultural minority groups that are on the frontier. Nicely done. Nicely done. Good job. So there's diversity on the frontier and more elite British society on the coast. No, California's like this. Cool. Shoot a page. Back with please. So we zoomed in. Now we're going to zoom back out. And check us out. We kind of hit everything. I think we hit everything pretty well. We've talked a lot about New England and their identity. We've talked a lot about the middle colonies and their identity. We've talked about how this is all just the South now that relies on slavery. We're in business. Now let's talk about like some bigger generalizations. In 1701, we have 250,000 people. 250,000. Which sounds like a lot. From 1607, so like the first 93 years, 250,000 people. The next 75 years, though, that goes to 2.5 million. That's a huge population increase. A huge population increase. This population increase is caused by three things. One, slavery. That's a lot of people, and those slaves are having babies. Two, migration is continuing. People are still coming from Europe in large numbers. Three, people in America are having more children than people in Europe. So those three things combined are going to lead to a very high birth rate and a high increase in population in the colonies. This increase is for religious reasons. People are still coming to America for religious toleration. Economic reasons, people are still coming to America to get rich. And political turmoil, as we're still seeing struggles in Europe for political freedom and political equality. We're going to see, to Daniel's point, a lot of people are coming, but all these people that are coming by choice are still just different shades of white. English, German, Scottish, Irish, Dutch, Swedish. We're going to consider them old immigrants later. What does that imply there's going to be? New immigrants, yeah, good. So we'll get there when we get there, but there's just different kinds of white people that are coming from Western Europe. And of course, Africans are forced here and suffering discrimination and slave labor. Now, in general, these numbers are important. About 80% of colonists are farmers. That's a lot. Most people in the colonies are getting by farming, either cash crop farming, or in the South, being a poor white person working on somebody else's farm, or in the middle colonies working on a breadbasket type farm, growing wheat, or even in New England having a little farm for some vegetables for yourself. Most colonists are farmers. Shockingly, American colonists have a higher standard of living, are more successful than their partners in Europe. There's land is cheap, and land is abundant. Land is money. Because there's a lot of land and it's accessible, most Americans have some land, and therefore they're more successful than Europe, where they're very landlocked and land is very minimal. And even people that are working for a living, not their own farmers, are making 3 times as much money as their equals in Europe. So that's good. The colonies are becoming very successful very quickly. Very successful very quickly. Now, what can we say about the colonies in general? They're mostly English. As Brian pointed out, for the most part, these are English people, with some exceptions that are on the frontier. They are proud to keep their British freedoms, the ability to criticize the government, to write petitions, to have a vote, to have a say. They don't think of themselves as different from England, they just think of themselves in a different place from England. They are proud of their British freedoms and their British heritage and their British legacy. That'll be a very, very big thing in the period of period. Similarities in all colonies is they all are experimenting with self-government. They're all having colonial assemblies of some sort. For the most part, the colonies are very religiously tolerant. Even New England, as you saw, is becoming more religiously tolerant with the halfway covenant, taking the grips off of religious control. In most colonies, there is some opportunity to get educated, depending on where you are. And in most colonies, there are economic opportunities that you would not have in England, specifically because there is land. Now, one way in which they are not British is they are not really relying on any sort of monarchy in their day-to-day existence. They're relying on self-government, self-rule, colonial assemblies, town councils, ways in which people together are making their own decisions instead of relying on what a king tells them to do. So once a king starts telling them what to do, it won't go well. People get rowdy. But we'll save that for period 3. Good. Now, I kind of already talked diversity and demographics, but it's important you note how sharply the population rises. Right? It's a lot of people very quickly. Now, in the old world, so in Europe, class lines are very sharply defined. If you're born rich, chances are, how are you going to die? Rich. If you're born poor, how are you going to die? Poor. I don't want to these people come to America. In America, those classes still exist, but the lines are a little blurrier. There's more chances in America that you're born poor and you die middle class. Vice versa, you could be born rich and die poor. Because there's a more turbulence between the social classes in the New World than in the New World. Now, like I told you guys last week, the middle colonies are our most diverse. Our most groups, if you go back to this map, it would make sense. Because you see in the middle colonies here, it's all these different racial groups that are commingling.